Well, welcome to part two with James for our regular Sunday boxing chat. How are you doing there, James?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. Not too bad. Looking forward to getting into the Joyce chat.
All right. Well, take her away. What did you think? What were you expecting? And what did you think afterwards?
I wasn't expecting Joyce to force the action the way that he did. Um, I was expecting him to be slow. And I wasn't expecting him to be even slower than his last fight. He's punching through treacle every time he fights, isn't he? So it is a bit. He worries me because by the time he's thrown a shot, it takes 3 business days for it to arrive at the target. And he was shipping so much punishment because he can't even get his hands up in time. You know, he needs to retire now. Although I think the scorecards are a little bit. Well, one of the scorecards was a bit wide, the 4 pointer. Um, yeah, I do. I think a lot of the time he was sort of pushing forward and throwing the shots and stuff, but I wasn't surprised at the ending really because I did have Hrgovic down as the winner. So you know the right man did win, but I think it was a little bit wide.
Yeah,
Um,
that one score I thought was a little bit wide. Um, for me, I was disappointed in a number of ways. Emotionally, I wanted Joe Joyce to win. I predicted
mhm,
that Hrgovic would win, but I wanted Joe Joyce to win.
yeah,
Um,
certainly.
but if he was going to lose, I wanted him to lose by being flattened in like the second or third round, because that would have sent a message that your time is up. The
Yeah,
fact that he went the distance and in many people's eyes performed better than anticipated, I think will encourage him to keep going, which is the
yep,
thing I do not want him to do. I want him to retire.
yep,
Um,
certainly. And I don't think you're alone in your you know your desire there, but I think there's a lot of people calling for it. I think even Frank Warren wants that to happen. But again, you know, this is where people like Derek Chisora are not really doing the older boys any favors really because he's going out there. You know, he's stumbling on his words, mumbling a little bit, and he's going out there and still doing it and getting title shots for it. So, you know, a lot of them are going to be saying, "Well, if Del Boy can do it, so can I." You know, and Joe Joyce, I think he's in a worse position physically than Derek Chisora. I think he's very,
Yeah,
yeah,
when he spoke to Ade Oladipo in the ring, I thought, oh, he's actually sounds better than I've heard him for a while. But then I heard him speaking in the changing room, or dressing room rather, and I
mm,
noticed again that there was that problem. But the thing is, I know you've been reading the book, or read it a while ago, that book Damage about
yeah,
CTE.
yeah,
The fact that a person can still speak, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the clear. People
no,
have retired with good voices, good apparent cognitive function, and then 10 years later, they've shown severe cognitive decline. Like the number of shots you've taken of your career can really impact the neurological problems that you're going to experience when you're older.
yeah,
And to see the number of shots that Joe Joyce, well, and for that matter, Hrgovic, were taking yesterday, it kind of like, oh, that's just gonna have an effect down the road.
yeah.
Um,
You do wince, and I don't know if you noticed, but I'm sure at one point I noticed quite a hard rabbit punch from Hrgovic. I don't know if I was dreaming that, but there's a couple of times when he went back towards the ropes and he proper belted him round the back of the
yeah,
head.
yeah.
That's not going to help. That's not going to help things. You
There,
know, it's
there
just
was,
going to make things worse. I want him to, like you know, I want him to retire. He's not an idiot. He's quite a well-spoken sort of
Hmm.
um, well-educated bloke. Just go out. You don't even need to be tied to boxing. You probably made some money. Just go out and like live your life while you can. He's got to be there for his mum as well, who's blind. They seem to have a very close relationship. You don't want to end up cabbage, do you? You want to be there for your mum and any future kids that you might have. You know.
Yeah, you don't want to be like a Jerry Quarry, right? Who's got to
No,
move,
certainly not.
who's got to move in with your mom. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes those very very robust fighters who could take a real beating, um, they they're the ones who suffer the most. Like there's the Canadian George Chavallo, who's in a home
Mm,
in Toronto with severe dementia. Joe Bugner in Australia in a home with severe dementia. Um,
yep.
we were talking on part one about the my hero, my favorite boxer of all time, Sugar Ray Robinson. At the end, he had no memory of who he was,
No.
and we all know, of course, about Muhammad Ali, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, nobody wants to see Joe Joyce go down that road, but I think we're all sort of worried that that's the road he's going to go down. And he
Yep.
said something in the dressing room. He was being interviewed. He said, people talk about CTE. I've got all my wits about me. And I'm thinking, oh
You have
man,
now.
no, like
Yeah, you have now.
it's not about that. It's about, when he's 40, when he's my age, nobody wants to see him in a chair, right? Or in a home.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. And it's sad because I've said before, and I've alluded to it about watching Raging Bull. Watching this violent sport that we love. It is dirty. It's like you're at a peep show. You can't do anything. Like you want to shout, you want to help people, and just say, look, get out of there. But we're just leering at the sport in a way, aren't we? It's a guilty pleasure almost. And yeah, somebody needs to put their arms around him and just say, come on, Joe, stop, stop. He took some heavy shots, and yeah, he did better than I expected. People were talking about his defensive laxity. He was defensively lax, but ironically, I think he was better defensively than he's been in past fights, even though he was poor. Because at least he had his hands up a couple of
Yeah.
times, but that doesn't mean he needs to carry on, does it?
No, there was just lots there was lots to respect about both fighters. There was lots
Hmm.
to respect about the way they fought, but there was lots to kind of. It was one of those things where you wanted to kind of like look through your fingers, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and,
what I mean.
and there was one point. I'm not sure if it was in the last round or it might have been in the ninth round, where Hrgovic was in the corner and Joe Joyce was coming towards him, and then Joe Joyce kind of, leant to the side, like it was like
Yeah,
he kind of staggered, like we've
yeah,
all seen guys coming out of pubs, or maybe we've been that guy coming out of pubs, where you don't really have your feet under you, right? It's like the
no,
the sidewalk is sort of sort of tilted,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, oh man, that's just not good, right?
no,
But there was a lot of slowness. I mean, I thought Hrgovic was slow. Um, but Joe Joyce looked like he had his legs in treacle, and it was like
yeah.
it was like he had something, his arms were just slow. Like,
He's the epitome of what Muhammad Ali used to call the mummy.
yeah, yeah,
People say about George Foreman like that they compare. I've heard people compare. Andy does. Andy's Cavan Andy. He says it, don't he? He says he reminds me of George Foreman. I can see that comparison. Very sort of like not bumbling. What's the word? Just
plodding.
swing, swing, swing. 3 business days for it to arrive. And he hasn't got the power that George Foreman possessed. I don't actually think he's got the boxing ability that George Foreman possessed either.
No,
Um,
actually, George Foreman was actually a very good boxer.
mm,
We forget, particularly if we look at the 1970s George Foreman, we think of him as just this clubbing, killing machine, but he actually
yeah,
knew how to box. And
yeah,
when he came back as Big George, the outgoing, cheerful, avuncular fat man, he actually still knew how to box. He had
yeah.
changed everything, but he actually had good feet, and he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he set up Mora with a lovely one too, didn't he? And that was
Oh yeah, well
off a jab, and
he played with
so
Mora. He started throwing the left so that Mora wouldn't move that way, so that Mora would stay in front of him because he had a plan from the get go. He had a little
and then
target
bang,
right on Mora's chin, and as soon as that target came into full focus, it was good night.
it was good night, weren't it? Yeah, exactly. Actually, I want to give Joe Joyce a bit more credit there. It seems like I was disrespecting him because I'm not. Again, I'm not going to compare him to George Foreman in terms of boxing ability, but he does actually possess good boxing ability because he outboxed Daniel Dubois, who was the boxer going into that fight, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah. Absolutely.
he did outbox him. He used a good jab, and I think if he is going to continue, I think he'll be well served to employ that jab and just try and be a little bit more defensively aware. Stick behind the jab and just see where it's going to take him. Like nobody can tell him what to do. He's 19 stone. He's obviously quite to bring up that he's got all these faculties to defend himself so vociferously just tells me that he is probably going to carry on
Oh
because
yeah.
you know
I'm certain he will
I
carry on, and
yeah
I think it's entirely fair to say that the boxer is the last person who will appreciate or truly admit that their skills are in decline. Like their
hmm
trainers, their coaches, their fans, their family will probably all see these things before the boxer will. It's a little bit like, granddad is not willing to give up the car keys, even though everybody knows that granddad shouldn't be driving.
yeah basically yeah
And that's a very difficult conversation to have, right? Um,
and much like Grandad, boxing could be a car crash as well. So
yeah,
we
absolutely.
don't want to see it. We don't want to see it.
If Joe Joyce does continue, and I think we're on the same page, we're thinking that he will continue, and there's nothing really that fans like us can do about it except sort of keep our fingers crossed that he doesn't get hurt. Where do you see him going? Like, who do you see him fighting?
The winner of Johnny Fisher and Dave Allen, because it's
Okay.
not purely because I think Frank Warren's turning around and saying that he thinks that Joyce should retire. He's alluded to that. Um, Obviously, Hearn and Warren are now in bed together in terms of the zone, so it'd be an easy fight to make. And I don't think Frank would want to give Joe Joyce any sort of jeopardy. And I think, two men who are on the sort of central area ladder in terms of their skill sets, because I don't think Dave's quite British level and Johnny Fisher certainly isn't. It's a fight that might garner interest without a lot of risk for Joe Joyce.
Do you think that there's any possibility, or indeed any merit, and they're two separate questions,
Yeah.
in Joe Joyce going after someone like David Adelaide to try and regain the British title?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, he'd be doing it off a loss as well, wouldn't he? So, and I'm not a big fan of that. Like that you know, seems to be okay nowadays. Oh yeah, you're a bit of a loser. You're a bit of a journeyman type, and you're getting opportunities. I don't believe that should be the case. I think like I say, the perfect fight would be Allen or Johnny Fisher because that's a bit of Johnny Fisher's just a circus act. Dave Allen doesn't take his career seriously. He's nicknamed the Lazy Rhino in some quarters, isn't he? So
Yeah.
I just think, yeah, don't give him the jeopardy. But if if Johnny Fisher can get through the fight with Dave Allen, um, it might be a nice little money spinner for Joe because Johnny Fisher brings in the tickets, doesn't he? So I'd rather see him make a few quid in a low risk sort of scenario than going against a British champion like David Adley, who can punch.
Yes,
Because
he can. He's
we were
explosive,
talking,
right?
yeah, exactly. We were talking about it being on the break and that being wrong, but the fact is, he still belted
Yeah.
TKV and he still put him down. So no, I wouldn't want to see that for Joe Joyce. Keep him away from big punches.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I was thinking about him regaining the British title as being a nice way to sort of go out, but again, you're right. Adelaide is an explosive power puncher, and Adelaide is also a great athlete.
Yeah.
Um, Joe Joyce probably could handle Johnny Fisher. I would think so, even though Johnny Fisher's younger and a big puncher. I don't think Johnny Fisher's got a lot in the way of skills. In fact, I would I would favor Joe Joyce to beat Johnny Fisher.
Yeah. Yeah, I would. Um, and then that's what I mean. There wouldn't be much jeopardy. But don't let big Johnny Fisher hear you say that. I tell you,
Oh
he'll be
no,
he'll be
yeah,
he'll be coming for you. You won't be allowed round his house for tea.
big Johnny Fisher, a man covered in lots of very thin skin, apparently.
Yeah,
Um,
indeed.
but yeah, he see, the only family who, after winning the fight, still feel like they've got a lot to complain about and still play the victim. I mean,
Well, that tells you something, don't it? Really.
um, I thinking of Johnny Fisher. Uh, I mean, I think we're in agreement that he lost against Dave Allen, even though he
Mm.
was given the decision. Do you think
Yeah.
that he will be able to prevail over the Lazy Rhino in the rematch?
I do, yeah, but it's totally dependent on what Dave Allen turns up, whether Dave Allen's got the desire for it or not. Dave Allen trains. Allen will know where he's gone wrong and he'll be able to capitalise on it. But he's notorious at not training and not actually, giving himself the full opportunity to, reach some form of potential. So it
Is
just,
who's his Is his trainer Jamie Moore?
yeah, Jamie Moore, yeah. In
He's
fact, I should do the channel a favour, and in maybe the week before or whatever, I'll get in contact with Jamie Moore because he's a boxing friend of mine. You know,
cool,
I
awesome.
don't speak to him very often, but I've got his number, and maybe I'll get a little bit of comment from him.
That would be wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would think that Jamie Moore. I mean, would Jamie Moore tolerate somebody in the gym being lazy? Like, surely if he's taking on Dave Allen, he'd have given him the big, I expect you to perform kind of conversation, right?
Yeah, I would say that. I think Jamie is a decent taskmaster, but um, at the end of the day, I mean, how many trainers has Dave Allen had? You know,
Yeah.
I think he's got to go somewhere, hasn't he? I'm not 100% sure because I haven't actually spoken to Jamie on Dave Allen because I know Dave was with him and then he left, I think, and then he went back. I've never spoken to him about their relationship, so maybe that's something that I can get in contact with him about and
Yeah, that would be
maybe
good. You
pick
get a
his,
bit
pick
of
his brain.
bit of information. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he might not want to respond.
No,
I
fair
mean,
enough.
he will respond. He will respond. Do you know what I mean? He'll speak to me, but he might see it as like, oh, you're asking me about tactics and stuff like that. So I'll try my best. I'll try and get some comment for next week.
That would be outstanding.
Yeah,
But I would understand if Jamie Moore sort of said, "Well, look, I'll talk to you privately, but I don't want you
yeah, like
speaking to
that.
that guy in Canada."
Yeah, bugger off.
um, final, final. Oh, not the final. Did you manage to see Guido Vianello and Richard Torres Jr.?
Yes, I did. It was a bit bizarre, really. Like, Vianello did not use his height the way that he should have done. Um, Torres is Torres is a man who I believe would be more suited to say cruiserweight.
Well,
Yeah, bit of a weird matchup.
funny you should say that. I did a video this morning and I said if the Bridgerweight division was like legitimate, if there were a whole bunch of people in the Bridgerweight division, that would be the division for him to go into.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if he can get down to 200 pounds. Probably he could, and fight at cruiser. But yeah, I was disappointed. I picked Vianello to win based on his beating Makhmudov and his split decision loss against Efe Ajagba. I was expecting
yeah.
something else, but that Guido didn't show up. And
No,
yeah, I
he didn't use his advantages, did he? Torres reminds me a little bit of an older sort of fighter called Thomas Adamic from years ago.
right,
The
yeah,
Pole
yeah.
just seems to be like he'll get in amongst the action, but he's not quite big enough to make an impact. That's
Our mutual friend from Northern Ireland, Jerry, said he reminds him a little bit of Marciano. I snorted tea through my nostrils.
yeah, that is
I think,
quite a
I think,
comparison, isn't it?
I think, Jerry might have been on the Bushmills or something when he made that comment.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to if we do another collaboration, we'll have to pull him up on that, won't we? When I meet
Yeah,
him, he come up.
yeah. So I'm sure he'll end up watching this and say,
Yeah,
full respect, Jerry, full respect, man. Um, but yeah, no, I was disappointed, and I'm left with the feeling that if Richard Torres Jr. is the future of USA boxing, that we're going to have we're going to have a lean period of boxing in the United States of America for a while to come.
I mean, there's been a lean period in terms of heavyweights in America for the last 20 years. I mean, Wilder was the guy that they pinned all their hopes on, and fair play. I mean, he was champion for 5, 6 years, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
did
He doesn't really have any skills. He just had a beautiful right hand.
10 title
Um,
defenses. He was the
yeah,
man until Tyson Fury exposed him,
took
and
himself.
fair play. He fought very well in that trilogy with Fury.
He did.
So,
He did.
but
But I mean, it's very thin on the ground, isn't it? It's very thin on the ground. Who's followed him? You know,
well,
nobody really.
Jared Anderson was being touted, but Jared Anderson is, as Mr. Porky would say, a busted flush.
Yep.
So, yeah. Um, the, the final fight that I thought we could just touch on before we run out of time, I see Fabio Wardley is now contracted to fight Big Baby or Big Pharma Miller. Have you seen any of those interviews?
I've not seen the interviews, but I'm quite disgusted at it, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought you
I
might
just,
be.
yeah, it sickens me because like everyone keeps giving Dillian White opportunities. The man should not be anywhere near a boxing ring, Dillian White, and neither should Big Baby Miller. He shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring. But he continues, and this is why boxing's rotten in some respects, because people who don't deserve to be in the ring. Imagine if he fought Joe Joyce. Right, we're talking about Joe Joyce and CTE and the after effects and everything like that. He's detonating shots while he's a juiced up fighter.
Yeah.
Imagine if he killed someone. You know,
Well,
it's disgusting.
imagine you're the father of a boxer and you've got suspicions that your son's opponent is juiced up, and you see that smirk on the face, and
Yeah,
he's still eating shots after 8 or 9 rounds. He's still moving like it's round one or two, and
yeah,
your son's getting battered, and your son's a better fighter, but for the fact that the other guy has got performance enhancing drugs in the system.
yeah.
And this isn't
It's
like sprinting.
disgusting.
It's not like watching your son come second in a 100 meters race against a juiced athlete. That's bad. But in a combat sport, you're going in against somebody who's weaponized essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And I've always said that. You know, it's It's disgusting. And the only time things will change, the only time that these cheats will be frowned upon properly is unfortunately when someone does die.
Yeah.
And, the instigator of it is unfortunately, a recipient of these drugs. So it's going to
Yeah.
happen one day, hopefully not too soon.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see a lifetime ban. Like, I'm sorry, it's in your system, absolute liability, you're done.
Hmm.
Because it's just too dangerous. It's like wearing brass knuckles.
Yeah,
It's
of course it is.
or carrying a weapon, right? It's like
Well,
no.
look at Lewis Resto. Look at Lewis Resto and Billy Collins. All right, that wasn't performance enhancing drugs, but they had that advantage there with the raps. And then Panama Lewis, um, who was it? I think it was Panama Lewis, wasn't it?
Mhm.
In the corner, he was giving bottles to Aaron Pryor, and he was allowed to carry on. And then he eventually went to prison. Now it's not the same thing like performing enhancing drugs wise, but he went to prison. So why isn't that same level of disgust afforded to people injecting their bodies? Like criminality in boxing is obviously frowned upon. Otherwise, Panama Lewis wouldn't have gone to prison, would he? So yeah, yeah, just let's be consistent with
Yeah,
refereeing, with judging, with the
and
way that Conor
with drugs,
Ben,
yeah.
Conor Ben shouldn't be fighting, should he, in the next
No,
couple of weeks?
he should have had his ticket punched, and that's it. Sorry, you're done, right?
Yep.
Because you've taken something, or you've allowed yourself to be given something
Hmm.
that can put you in a position where you can kill somebody.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
You consent to run a certain risk in boxing, but you don't consent to go in against somebody who has had
With a
their,
loaded gun.
yeah, they've become weaponized. So yeah, we're
Yeah.
on the same page there. Well, my friend,
Exactly.
it looks like we're running out of time, so I'll thank you again for coming on. It's I look forward very much to our Sunday chats,
Yeah.
and
Same here. It's been a pleasure, Bob. Been a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, folks, that's James from another Porky's Corner alumnus, part-time podcaster, former boxing writer, former boxing commentator, and regular Sunday guest on Canada's Boxing Channel. If you've enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. And James and I will see you next Sunday, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks very much for
Take care,
watching.
everyone. Bye
Thanks,
bye.
James. Cheers, bro.